Alright guys, so we have Koyanskaya of the Dankness over here on the NA version of the game for our New Year's celebration, and the big question is she worth pulling for? And that's kind of a tough question to answer, because I'm not going to pretend that the NA players don't know what's coming out next year for Lost Belt 7. You guys know that Kukulkan's going to be coming out, and she pretty much does everything that Koyanskaya of the Darkness does, but a little bit better. But I have a couple of things in this video that I do think, in some niche corner cases, that Koyan Dark does a little bit better. Not enough to really push you to summon for Koyanskaya of the Darkness over summoning for Kukulkan next year, but if you're not really going to be summoning this year and you happen to really like Tugunska Sanctuary, maybe you're just a big fan of Bunny Fox Girls and you wanted to pull for her and know she's going to be good, she is rather solid. And at least for the context of this review, let's just pretend that we don't know that Kukulkan exists, so that Koyan Dark can actually be properly rated in this video, because I do think she's a legitimately very strong servant, and I just think it's very unfortunate that they tossed Kukulkan, that pretty much replaced Koyan Dark almost entirely when she came out. Again, there are some niche cases where I do think Koyan Dark might be a little bit more useful, but those are really going to be very few and far between, but I do think they exist. Before we start getting into this video, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for that daily FGO content. And if you want to remain informed on the goings on of both the JP and the NA version of the game, then make sure you're subscribed. With that being said, let's start diving into Koyanskaya's kit, starting off with her hits, and she's rocking a pretty solid Buster kit. The double Buster, double Arts is something that I really like to see, but also keep in mind that with the other Koyanskaya that came out just a couple months earlier, and that should be on rate up right now alongside Koyan Dark, that she functionally will make her Buster cards pseudo Arts cards, as each Koyanskaya is going to allow those Buster cards to generate 10% NP, and so with two of them, if you happen to have your own, will be generating 20% NP every time you fire that Buster card. So the Buster cards will help out a little bit with that slightly lower NP gain, not super stupid low. It's 0.67% with 3-hit Arts cards. It's not terrible, especially considering that her passive skills are giving her a little bit of a buff with that 5% Arts performance buff, which does help her out just a little bit. But if you're finding that to be a bit lacking, do keep in mind she is meant to be paired with Koyan Light, who does fix that out a little bit. You also know that they were trying to pander to literally me exactly, because they gave her the 5-hit extra attack, which you know we love to see around here, as it gens stars, NP, and does big boy damage. So if you're going to go in for extra copies and you want to append her up, she's got that strong extra attack. Going back to some of those passive skills that I just mentioned, she does have a couple of neat ones as a foreigner. For one, she's going to gen an additional 2 stars every single turn, which doesn't sound a lot on its own, but when you start pairing this with, say, a Merlin or 2030 CE, stuff along those lines, or other servants that you might be bringing to, say, a CQ or some of the more odd advanced quests that we're going to be getting over the year, then it starts to add up with all those extra stars that other guys are providing, and it's just nice to have. It's a nice little thing they tacked on there. She also has a small power mod against wild beast enemies of 20%, very similar to Muramasa's anti-king power mod that he has on his passive, which isn't going to give you a whole lot of damage, but it is a different buff type, and when you are fighting a wild beast enemy, whenever that does occur, it's going to be nice to have, and it'll just give you that little bit of extra damage. And then finally, on her last buff over here, if she is fighting a wild beast enemy, she gains a 20% chance to hit them with buff block for 1 time for 3 turns. So not only does she have a power mod against them, but she kind of has that Jolter-like effect that she has on her NP, except it applies to all of her cards, and it's a 20% chance. So it's decent enough that you should see it proc fairly often if you're fighting a wild beast boss or some really big, say, free quest enemy that they happen to make a boss, you know, anything along those lines. You'll be able to see a little bit of a slight improvement in her abilities when fighting those enemies. But let's start moving into some of her skills. And skill 1 is a very good showing of one thing that I think she does have over Kukulkan, and that is team support, as this skill is not only going to increase her own Buster performance by 30% for 3 turns, but it's going to do that for the entire party, alongside charging the entire party's NP by 30%, which you will will see in the background, that does come in clutch. It's very nice when you want your supports to be getting to their NPs, because if you're using someone like Merlin, his NP is still very strong. You want to be getting Garden of Avalon as often as possible. And with the other Koyanskaya, her NP is also very useful, not only for just a little bit of extra chip damage, but it also reduces the enemy's charge, and it also gives your party extra NP. You'll actually see at some point in this gameplay I make a mistake. There's one NP chain where I should have put Koyan Dark's NP in front of Koyan Light because of her overcharge effect to give extra NP, but I made a little bit of a blunder there, but it's okay. We still win in the end, so I don't think it really matters all that much. Just wanted to point that out before someone else does. But then the final effect on this first skill is kind of interesting. It's going to reduce the critical star absorption of all Hominity servants by 100% for one turn, essentially allowing Koyan Dark to get all the crit stars during the turn that you fire this skill. And it's going to be easier for me to show you the non-Hominity servants than to show you all Hominity servants by themselves. So I'll throw that up on screen right now, but you'll notice that really the two main people that you'll notice that are on this category that are not going to be affected by this last part are going to be the original Koyanskaya and Oberon. So if you're using them for some boss fights, you just know they might be trying to steal your stars. But on that note, we can move over to the second skill, which again has some very powerful effects. It's going to overcharge one ally's NP by 2 stages for one time for 3 turns, and then grant them an on-attack buff that gives them 5 crit stars when normal attacking with their buster cards. So combo's very nice with what the original Koyanskaya gives you with NP. Now you're also turning them into mini quick cards. And then all of your animal characteristic servant allies are going to get a 30% attack and a 30% defensive buff. So if you did, for say, use the setup that I'm using and wanted your Koyanskaya to give you some extra NP, or you wanted your Merlin to give you a couple of extra stars, you could give this to one of them and still get the attack and defensive buff for all of your animal characteristic allies. Obviously, you do want to use this on Koyan Dark herself if you are fighting an Earth attribute enemy, because this is going to overcharge the power mod that she has on her overcharge effect on her NP. But if you're not fighting an Earth attribute enemy, you can spend this on your supports and then still get the attack and defensive bonus for yourself. So it's very nice for that, but you can also use it as a little bit of a tech option if you want to buff up some of your supports, which again is one thing that I do like a little bit more about Koyan Dark than Kukulkan, is that Koyan Dark, ironically enough, plays very nicely with the other supports, despite her kind of being this evil beast lady. Then there's her third skill, which is actually aging fairly well. It's going to give her Pierce Invincibility for 3 turns, which is very nice because this is going to allow you to bypass all dodges and invulns that the enemy is going to throw your way, so she can always smack the enemy because she has this. It will give her a nice 50% critical damage buff, which again is always nice. Buster loves doing big crits, so her giving herself a nice solid waiver equivalent crit damage buff is going to be very well appreciated. And then she gives herself an on attack buff that will basically hit the enemy with every debuff known to man. We're talking poison, curse, and burn, and then she also increases the poison, curse, and burn damage rate by 100%. Now, normally I wouldn't value this very much. You guys know that I don't really care about the damage over time skills, but here's what changed. Not only do we now have Honey Lake, which gives you a power mod if the enemy is burned, but we also got a Jacques de Molay CE that does the same thing but for curse. So now these units that have these random, burn buffs or curse buffs and probably soon to be poison buffs are getting free power mods on these strong 50% starting charge attack CEs that are making these effects a lot stronger. And so Koyan Dark is aging a lot better because of this, because again, 50% battery, you can use that in buster looping if you wanted to. Maybe you wanted to throw one of her face cards in front of one of the larger enemies on a node, get that special power mod against them, and do a bit of extra damage, which might be helpful if you're rocking, say, an NP1 Koyan Dark or something. If you don't have something like Black Grail, this might be a way to get around that. And I guess on the topic of NPs, let's talk about our own NP. It's going to give her a 20% attack buff that procs first, which is very nice, especially if you get her power mod, because all those buffs are going to add and multiply into each other to give her even more damage. She is going to remove all the enemy's offensive buffs, which you may say, oh man, I wanted to remove defensive buffs or all enemy buffs. Well, don't worry, because she has the Pierce Invincibility, that's the better form of removing defensive buffs, because not all enemy defensive buffs can be removed, even though it's a little bit of a rarer thing for them to have an unremovable dodge or an unremovable invincibility. It's just better to have the flat out Pierce Invincibility for those corner cases, and removing their offensive buffs is very nice because now you kind of have the best of both worlds, being able to get around most defensive abilities and then also being able to limit how much the enemy is stacking up, say, their NP damage buffs, their attack buffs, Crit damage buff especially can be very annoying, and so I find this to be very nice if you're going to bring her into some more difficult content. And then she's going to hit them with a buster resistance down by 20% for 3 turns, so subsequent NPs, if you're looping her NP consistently enough, will do more and more damage. And then obviously on the overcharge, there's the aforementioned Earth Attribute Power mod. So now that we have all of that, covered and we have all of our stuff down, what do I think about this unit? Well, first and foremost, let me get the grading out of the way. I do think Koyan Dark still deserves to be an A+ unit. I think originally when she came out, I jumped the gun a little bit and put her in that S tier bracket, but as time has gone on, especially now that we have people like Kukulkan, I do think she drops to a higher A+ rating, but I don't think she drops lower than that because she is still very strong. Obviously, I don't have to show any footage of her doing buster farming or anything because she can buster farm. So I wanted to show her applications in, say, more difficult, wonky content or just a standard boss fight in the case of Kiara, and show that she can be very good in these setups. She does have a very strong kit that you can bring her to fight a lot of these enemies, and it's not like Earth Attribute Power mod is lacking in boss fights. Not even getting into all the different servants that are on, say, the Earth Attribute Power mod, you have a lot of random bosses that some players might still have to go up against, say, the Barrel-Possessed Woodwoe, sorry, spoilers, the Melusine fight, the Bargus fight. Upcoming, you have the Benny Alter fight, the Cerberus fights that if you're going into Lost Belt 5 and you don't have a DPS check, you'll be able to easily watch that with, say, your Koyan Dark. She has the power mod against them. When Tron comes up, a lot of those Earth Servants that are time-based fights, if you don't have a stronger box, she can definitely wipe a lot of those guys. Like, there are a lot of more wonky fights that have a lot of Earth Attribute Power mod guys that she's going to be very strong into. But I can't give her that S tier rating because I do find that she's lacking some hardline survivability that, say, people like Kukulkan are not lacking. Like, there's no guts, there's no invincibility, not even a dodge or damage cut. The best thing she has is 30% defense, which is solid enough to help her tank some hits, but unless you're rocking Merlin, you effectively have no survivability. And so I think she's going to be a very strong farmer, but it's hard for me to put her in that S tier position as a farmer because Kukulkan literally comes in and just steals her job. It's like bigger battery, same power mod, plus threat against humanity, plus even more damage. It's just a really bad situation for Koyan Dark to be in. It's not her fault. But I do think she shines a little bit more when it comes to more difficult content because she plays very nicely with her supports. Again, being able to pass off a double overcharge to any one of your supports is going to be very nice and will age very well because God forbid they put out another like Merlin 2.0 for the buster farming guys or just even for buster CQs. That guy is going to love being next to Koyan Dark, who will just take the overcharge effect, and then Koyan Dark herself will be like, and I still get to keep my attack and defensive buff. And then she's also giving everybody 30% gauge. That's not nothing. That's really good. Again, consider how good that makes someone like Tetskali Poka, who's going to be coming out next year as well, that he not only gives himself a battery, but also gives the entire party that 30%. Stuff like that is not nothing and is very strong. And especially in, say, 90 plus or 90 plus content, giving that little extra buster buff and potentially even that extra attack buff if you're using, say, an animal characteristic servant, that will go a long way, especially for weaker boxes. Getting extra support from your DPS is never a bad thing. So if you are going to decide to roll on Koyan Dark and you're feeling bad about it, but maybe she's one of your favorite servants, don't be sad or mad about it. She is a solid and very strong servant. It's just unfortunate that the meta caught up to her very quickly. But if you decide to still use Koyan Dark even after Kukulkan comes out, it's fine. Think about the same example that I give to my arts AoEs where, say, Melusine comes out, she's worth $3 million. Well, don't worry, Ibuki's still worth $2 million, and Space Ishtar is still worth like $1 million. They didn't lose any value, you just have something more valuable and better that is there, but you can still use your $2 million investment, right? You can still use the servant that you like and that you've invested in because they're not bad. They didn't get nerfed, just something better came out, which is something I do kind of like about the FGO power creep, is that you could still use older servants if you want to use them. I mean, you could still use someone like Gilgamesh and Buster Farming, who's a year 1 servant. If given proper buffs or their kit is just good enough when they release, you'll still be able to use that servant as long as they don't drastically change the content that is going to gatekeep other servants. But let's, hope and pray we don't see stuff like that, even though 90 plus content is kind of already doing that. But that's a different discussion for another time. On that note, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will catch you guys in the next couple of days with just a bunch of GSSR and summoning videos, and hoping that I can get Koyan Light on JP. But But wish me good luck, and I wish you guys the best of luck on your Koyan Dark summons. Peace, late guys.